During this season of Thanksgiving, we've been moved by the outpouring of love in response to the tragic wildfires in California. Our first responders, as always, are leading the charge, going far beyond the call of duty to protect people and property. We are in awe of their commitment and are forever indebted to them. For the latest on this evolving situation, please visit our travel alert page, which provides official updates from across the state. You can find it at visitcalifornia.com. And please support first responders and aid organizations during this difficult time. Together, we can help these communities rebuild. Thank you so much. Welcome to the California Now podcast, produced by Visit California. I'm Satirius Johnson. You may know Atlas Obscura as the go-to source for the most offbeat, unlikely, or plain unbelievable destinations on the planet. Well, they've created a children's book designed to inspire young travelers.
Even if you start with the fact that, Bigfoot almost definitely doesn't exist, it is still fun to entertain the idea.
And we'll discuss some of the most exciting new architecture in California, buildings that are worth a detour on your next road trip. Plus, we cross the Bay Bridge for an insider's guide to Oakland.
The East Bay still does have these kind of secret hidden pockets. Just don't tell anybody else.
It's all coming up on California Now. My first guest is an authority on all things weird and wacky and wondrous. Dylan Thuras is the co-founder of Atlas Obscura, a media outlet with a mission to inspire wonder and curiosity about the incredible world we all share. Atlas Obscura has an awesome website you should explore, and they also have a brand new book targeting a younger demographic, the Atlas Obscura Explorer's Guide for the World's Most Adventurous Kid. Welcome back to the California Now podcast, Dylan.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be back.
So congratulations on the new book. What prompted you to write something for kids?
It's funny, we talk about inspiring that sense of wonder and curiosity in people. Kids have that naturally. It's just part of who they are. And I remember when I was that age, like a 10-year-old, going to the library and poring over books about, hidden temples and abandoned castles. And I just wanted to make a book that a kid could open to any page and just find a little bit of the world's wonder, something that would, inspire them to go out and explore and find other amazing things.
Well, I love your first book, Atlas Obscura, An Explorer's Guide to the World's Hidden Wonders. Is this new one kind of a companion book for the young explorer?
It is, although it's organized in a slightly different way. Each two-page spread is a country, but then the connection is, say you're in India and you're at the root bridges, you turn the page and you're in Peru and you're at this woven grass bridge, the last Incan bridge. And so you move through the whole world this way, going from a waterfall in Zambia to a frozen waterfall in Antarctica. And so it's this kind of fun, crazy journey of discovery and imagination.
Is it written for 5-year-olds or 12-year-olds or their parents?
The perfect age range, I would say, is about 6 to 12. At that 12-year-old mark, they can probably pull the big book. But the thing is it's pretty fun to look through for anyone. I actually think I see adults slyly kind of paging through and reading it because it's the same thing. I mean, it's the same ideas, and the places are no less wondrous.
It sounds like the book can be used as a guide to find potential off-the-beaten-path destinations to travel to that everyone will enjoy.
Yeah, although I would caution, we have places like Snake Island off the coast of Brazil or Blood Falls in Antarctica, places that probably aren't necessarily the top for a family vacation.
Right. Maybe just better to read about them than to actually visit them.
Yeah, in this case, that's probably correct, yeah.
Right. So how old are your kids now?
Oh, they're little. They're 1.5 years old and 3.5 years old. So we've been traveling with them, but they're not quite. I looked through this book with my son, the 3.5-year-old, and he really enjoyed it. We talked about all the pictures, the dinosaurs, the explosions, but I think he's not quite at the place. The difference between Maine and Spain for him is basically zero right now.
So you didn't get any kind of real tangible feedback on the book from your kids, but maybe you got kind of some tangential feedback.
He likes the pages that have either fire or dinosaurs. That's the main interest there. Yeah.
So what's your philosophy on hitting the road with your kids? Because of your work, I imagine you sometimes take them with you when you explore some remote destinations, or are they too young for that at this point?
No, we do. I mean, it doesn't always work, but we just took them out to Joshua Tree for a sort of a 4-day trip, and we had a blast. We saw everything that we wanted to see, and for the most part, it worked great. I mean, I think you have to plan your days a little bit differently and make downtime and nap time, but other than that, we've found we can do almost everything that we want to do with the kids.
Very cool. So if you don't mind, I'd love to talk with you about some family-friendly destinations in California that come with the Atlas Obscura seal of approval. So do you have any suggestions for us?
Well, I'll start with the places we just took our kids, and they were sort of all around the Yucca Valley, Joshua Tree area. So there's so many fun, weird, interesting things in that region. We took them to a place I'd always wanted to go called Giant Rock, which is the world's largest freestanding boulder and has this amazing story behind it about a miner who lived underneath the rock and was killed in this accidental explosion, and then it became a site for UFO conferences, and it's just there's more history than you can pack on a page about this place. But for my son and daughter, it was just a place where they could walk around and explore this enormous, crazy-looking boulder, and we had a lot of fun. So that was one of a number of places. We went to a place called Bob's Crystal Cave at the Yucca Valley Swap Meet. So in the middle of this swap meet, filled with all kinds of interesting stuff, there's a little handmade cave. I mean, it is a cave, and you go in and it's got a tiny waterfall in it and all of these crystals. And my son was like completely transfixed. He could have stayed in there for an hour. It was amazing. The thing about that area is there's so much. We went to the world famous crochet museum, which, it doesn't take super long to visit. The room is about like 5 by 3, but it's really cute. It's really fun. There's an outsider artist sculpture park called the Desert Christ Park, and it's all of these big religious statues, but they're scattered across this natural environment, and you can go crawling up the hillside, and it's just a fun place to let kids sort of run around and yourself kind of run around and look at the different sculptures there. And that was built by a guy in the 1950s who wanted to, celebrate all of these things.
Traveling with kids, obviously is a different dynamic. Was it still fun for you?
Oh yeah, we had a great time. I mean, we really enjoyed ourselves. And again, you have to plan your day a little differently. And I'm a big believer that when you're traveling with kids, it's easier to pick a home base and then do little trips out from there, little weekend trips, little day trips, than sort of constantly be on the road, because it's just a pain to break down and set up and break down and set up. But if you can kind of do this more like, circling back to a home base style, I find it works really well.
Tell us about another wonder-filled place that kids love.
Well, so this is a place in Fort Bragg, and it's fairly well known, called Glass Beach. It was this dumping ground for trash, tons and tons of old bottles and just whatever got kind of thrown there. But over the decades and decades, it has turned into this kind of magical space where the beachfront is covered in these tiny little bits of sea glass. Bottles broke, they got worn down over the years, and it's like little gems kind of hidden all around. And the sort of irony of this is it became this kind of beautiful, wondrous place, and now the problem is that people are taking them. So you really need to leave all the glass pieces there, but it's a real fun treasure hunt with kids. When I was there recently, and I just saw tons of families, and kids were having a blast combing through the sand, finding different colored bits of glass, and even the other parts of the area where you see like metal that is kind of rusted into something that almost looks like a geological formation. And then you look carefully and you're like, oh, those are old cans. It's a fun place for kids. And you're by the water, so that's nice anyway.
Yeah, the Mendocino coast is definitely on my to-do list, and I can't wait to see those little gems for myself. I've seen photos of it, but I'd really like to see it in person. And yeah, there's got to be a real educational component to places like Glass Beach, opportunities to open up kids' minds and get them thinking about the wider world that they live in.
Yeah, I mean, you get to talk about a lot of fun things in a place like Glass Beach or any of these places. You get to talk about what we do with our trash and how time changes things and how something that seems, not very valuable can become something very special in a different circumstance. Totally.
How about another kid-friendly spot to visit?
Well, a great one that's a kind of a natural wonder would be the Guadalupe Dunes. And these are big sand dunes that almost look like, you're in a Middle Eastern desert, but they also hold this kind of wonderful secret, which is they were the site of Cecil B. DeMille's Ten Commandments movie, this giant epic shot in the 1920s. And when it was over, he just buried the entire set. So 10 giant sphinxes are sitting there underneath the sand. And besides that, they have this incredible history of these kind of commune called the Dunites who came out there and lived and made all kinds of art. And it's a place filled with both tons of fun, weird history, and you can find little old pieces of bottles or things from those early periods, and great natural wonder where kids can just run around, play on the dunes, play with the sand. So it's got a nice combo.
And he buried it because he didn't want other directors to use his set?
That's right. It was kind of like a spiteful. He built this fabulous thing, and then he said basically tear it down and stick it under the sand so no one can come and use it in their biblical epics.
Wow. And where exactly is it?
That's in Guadalupe, California. So it's a little bit south of San Luis Obispo, where if you're visiting the Guadalupe Dunes, you might as well stay at the Madonna Inn, which is one of the great theme, like crazy, wacky 1950s, 1960s inns in the world. I mean, there's not much like it. So you can make a whole weekend trip out of it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Did I notice a Bigfoot related spot as well?
You did. This is a theoretical trip that I basically want to do with the kids. So up Northern California, in Arcata. First, I want to go. This is like a festival, an event. It is the Kinetic Grand Championship, and it's an event that actually has been duplicated, and they now run in Maryland as well. But the Kinetic Grand Championship is the origin. It is the original, and the idea is basically it's a combination of art and engineering, where people build these amazing, weird sculptures that they can also pilot, that they can also ride. So sometimes they're sort of bicycles or other things. But it's this wonderful, very fun, wacky event. And then not very far from Arcata and the Kinetic Grand Championships is the China Flats Bigfoot collection. And this area is where the original, that famous film of Bigfoot, comes from around here. And so they've just got, plaster casts and maps and other little bits of Bigfoot ephemera. But I mean, kids, it's a fun thing to talk about with kids, even if you start with the fact that Bigfoot almost definitely doesn't exist. However, it is still fun to entertain the idea. As my son would say, hey, we're just pretending. And then there's a final stop actually on that trip that I would like to add, and it feels right with the Bigfoot vibe, which is a little north of there. It's a place called Fern Canyon, and it's shown up in a couple of movies and a Jurassic Park, and this is like the quintessential fern gully. I mean, it's basically 30-foot tall walls covered entirely in different species of ferns. So you walk through this space and it's like this lush hallway of primordial nature. It feels like a great place to bring kids, go for a little hike, and take them into this kind of magical wonderland. So that feels to me like it would be a great family trip.
Wow, sounds really amazing. So we have time for one more recommendation. Where are you taking us?
One more with kids. You know what? So I want to go to San Francisco just for a second, because it has got to be the only city on the planet that has 2 municipal slides. How can you not love a city that's got 2 municipal slides? So they have the Seward Street slides, and both of them are actually great examples of communities who sort of, said, we want to save this space and use it for public fun, public use. So the Seward Street slides were saved basically in the 1970s, and it was this big campaign to turn this space, to not have it be turned over to developers, and instead do something fun for the community there. So they are still these concrete slides. They're smooth. You really need a piece of cardboard for them, but you can go pretty fast on those. And then there's another set of slides called the Winfield slides, and it's a similar story. They were falling apart in the 90s, and the community came together and said, we'll take on the volunteer work. We'll fix these up. And they did. And now they're part of this beautiful terraced garden with these two great long metal slides you can go shooting down. Also best done with cardboard. But anyway, I just, what a fun thing to take a kid to do and say, not only is it civic urban education, but you get to go down a couple of big slides too. And they're both pretty long. These are not like 6-foot slides. These are like 60-foot slides.
That's incredible. I've been to San Francisco many times, and I've never even heard of these.
You are going with the wrong people. You got to get people to take you, go sliding.
Well, it was great to have you back on the podcast, Dylan. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me. It was really fun to talk to you.
The new book is called The Atlas Obscura Explorer's Guide for the World's Most Adventurous Kid, and it seems like a pretty great gift idea for nieces, nephews, daughters, sons, and their parents. You can find it at atlasobscura.com, as well as your favorite bookstore. And as always, you'll find links and more information about everything we discussed today at visitcalifornia.com/podcast. Coming up, California has plenty of world-famous must-see destinations, the Hollywood sign, the Golden Gate Bridge, Disneyland, but sometimes we like to take you where the locals go, and today it's an insider's guide to Oakland and Berkeley. But first, there's more to California architecture than Art Deco and mid-century modern. We've got a fast survey of recent construction that's well worth a visit. You're listening to the California Now podcast. Author Sam Lubell has written 8 books on architecture, including the fascinating Mid-Century Modern Architecture Travel Guide. In today's lightning round, we'll talk about some of the most compelling new constructs in California, buildings that have gone up in the last few years that are worth a drive-by on your next road trip. Sam, welcome back to the California Now podcast.
Thanks. Good to be here again.
So before we get you to share a few of your favorites, Sam, can you give us a quick snapshot of the state of California architecture? Is it an exciting time to be in your line of work?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it really is. I think California is certainly one of the strongest economies in the country right now. And you can see examples like the tech world in Silicon Valley. They're building like crazy. And LA is a similar way. It's just growing like maybe too fast. And there's a lot of stuff happening and really, really talented architects to pull it off.
All right, then, let's get to it. Starting in the southern part of the state and working our way north, let's talk about some of your favorite new buildings and what makes them noteworthy. I'm guessing we begin in San Diego County?
Yeah, let's start in San Diego. Probably my favorite new building there is the Central Library in San Diego by Rob Quigley. And essentially what he did there, this library took so long to build, but essentially he's bringing back the idea of this sort of take your breath away, awe-inspiring central space, sort of an atrium, reading room where you look up and in several floors up at a time, and sort of it brings sort of the grandeur back to architecture spaces in a really contemporary vocabulary.
That sounds very cool. What's next?
Probably the next one is in Anaheim. And that is the new Arctic train station, not Arctic like in the Arctic, but Arctic, which is a long acronym that I won't get into. But essentially, it's a train station that was built to anticipate high-speed rail coming to the state, but it's already being used for regular rail and also to host buses and other forms of transportation. And it's also bringing back the idea of the cavernous space, which you can see I love, and the sort of drama to architecture. It's one continuous hall that on top is actually covered with plastic panels. They're called ETFE panels. They're inflatable, and that basically helps with insulation, but it also allows for natural light to come into the space from all around it, and it opens it up, and it's really one of the coolest new spaces in California.
Nice. I'm guessing LA has got to have some cool buildings, right?
LA definitely has some cool buildings and a lot of cool architects, but probably my favorite, not original, the newest the new major art museum is the Broad, which is built by Diller Scofidio and Renfro, and it's on Grand Avenue in downtown LA. It's really injected a lot of energy into that area. It's the art collection of Eli Broad, one of the richer men in L.A., and it's basically it's got sort of this waffle exterior made out of it's really high tech fiberglass panels that were sort of formed in a pattern that you really couldn't do without computer fabrication. And inside, you kind of take this long long escalator tube ride up from this kind of cave-like first floor up to this open and completely spacious second floor, where you're bombarded by art, but also bombarded by natural light, which is rare in art spaces.
Right. So you're going for the architecture, but then you're also treated to a lot of really amazing art as well, right?
Yeah, Eli Broad collects pretty much every major contemporary artist there is. If you're looking for the big names in contemporary art, he's got about everybody in that collection, and it's worth it. Right,
2 for 1. Where to next?
Next, I would go up to Silicon Valley, and I would kind of look at a group of buildings, and that's the new buildings by the monster tech companies. That includes Apple, Samsung, and Facebook. And Apple, the new headquarters by Foster & Partners, is incredible. Like Apple, it's an incredible kind of perfectly detailed building. It's a giant disc known as a lot of things, flying saucer, donut. And in the middle, there's a giant park. It's absolutely wonderful, except that you can't really visit it. You can only overlook it from the visitor center, and that's very Apple, and it's closed off, and there's walls around it. So urbanistically, I'm not a fan, but architecturally, I am. Samsung's new headquarters was designed by NVBJ, and the idea of that is to actually build towers around central courtyards that keep repeating every few floors, so that employees will walk out into natural spaces as often as they can and interact as often as they can in the outdoors, which makes a lot of sense in California. And on the lower level, there's public plazas that people can walk through. So that urbanistically works a little bit better. And then finally, Facebook by Frank Gehry. And the best part of that project, also very private because it's Facebook, is a roof, a planted roof where basically the whole staff hangs out most of the time, and really a smart use of a green roof. So those are some of the many new tech headquarters, and Google's trying to catch up, so they're coming soon too.
And we have to hit San Francisco, right?
Yes, definitely have to hit San Francisco. And my favorite building there is actually not quite done, but it's the Transbay Transit Terminal, actually meant to be the other end of high-speed rail, but also hosts a lot of other transportation options. Sort of an incredible open space, again, bringing in natural light and bringing in sort of that cavernous feeling of the old train stations that you see in Europe. But the highlight is also another green roof, and it's basically a giant park. I don't know how many acres, but it's several acres, and it's got meandering pathways through it, and it's a public park on top of the building, which I think is really, really a smart design. And that's designed by Pelly and Associates. I think it's Pelly Clark Pelly now, and they're also building the giant tower above it. So they're basically reinventing the city and this whole area, which is called the Transbay area, which also has towers by pretty much every famous architect, Norman Foster, Jeannie Gang, and everybody else you could think of.
All right, so we have time for one more cool new building. What do you choose?
I go to Oakland, actually. It's not brand new. It was built in the last maybe 10 years, but it's a cathedral. It's the new Oakland Cathedral. It's called the Cathedral of Christ the Light, and it's by SOM. And if you like to be inspired by holy spaces, it's a great place to go. It's really a modern interpretation of a cathedral with sort of a fabricated screen in the back that really dappled light comes through. Incredibly huge glulam beams that are sort of curved. And really just a breathtaking, inspiring space, which in architecture is the best thing I can ask for.
That's fascinating, Sam. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. This is a lot of fun. I like lightning rounds.
Sam Lubell is an author and contributing editor at the Architect's newspaper. He also writes for the New York Times, Wallpaper, Dwell, Wired, the LA Times, many others as well. You can learn more about all the buildings he discussed today through our show notes at visitcalifornia.com/podcast. This is California Now, and I'm your host, Satirius Johnson. My next guest is Jesse Ashlock, executive editor of Travel and Leisure magazine, and our subject is An Insider's Guide to Oakland. Welcome to the California Now podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you, Satirius.
Thank you for coming on. You know, Jesse, I'm a recent transplant from New York City, and you're living in Brooklyn these days, right?
I sure am.
And I've heard it said that Oakland is the new Brooklyn, a kind of cooler counterculture alternative to a nearby megalopolis. Do you think that's true?
Well, I think that a lot of Oakland residents might blanch at the comparison, but I kind of think it's true. I mean, there's a lot of truth to it in any case. And I think it's become truer and truer in recent years because, well, first of all, the dining scene in Oakland has just exploded, and it's an alternative to San Francisco for sure. I think more and more people are heading across the bridge to check out a new restaurant. And I also think that the kind of really cool, creative, artisanal culture of making things and making places that people associate with Brooklyn has really taken a hold in Oakland. You can see it in the changes that have taken hold in downtown. There's this amazing food hall called Swan's Market in this like century-old landmarked terracotta building with all these really cool restaurants, kind of street food vibe, and a really, really great farmer's market next to it. And that's quite emblematic, I think, of what you're going to experience for food and culture when you go to Oakland. And I think it's something that really started in Brooklyn.
Well, you know, the East Bay is really hot these days as a travel destination. And on a separate podcast, we've talked about some of the restaurants that have put it on the map, like you mentioned one there. But there's a lot more than food east of San Francisco, and you've selected a few favorites to share with us. So what's the Robert Sibley Volcanic Regional Preserve?
It's this wonderful park in the Oakland Hills. I used to go there all the time when I was younger, and it's a fantastic place to experience the palette of the East Bay, the greens and the yellows and the browns. There are wonderful, wonderful trails. You can hike, you can go horseback riding if that's your thing. And one of my favorite things about it is there's this stone labyrinth at the bottom of a valley, and you'll come to a cliff and overlook, and you'll see it down there, and you'll want to just run down and walk through the labyrinth. Kids adore it, of course. And then Sibley's nice just to drive to and from. It's on the end of Grizzly Peak Boulevard, and you can drive along Grizzly Peak Boulevard behind the Cal campus and take in these breathtaking views of the whole East Bay panorama. A lot of people like that as a bike ride, too. One of my favorite places to just be quiet when I go home.
So what do you see when you're up there? I mean, it's called a volcanic regional preserve. Do you actually see evidence of kind of like dried lava beds or lava flows or anything like that, or is it really kind of way beyond that?
It's beyond that, but you can go there and know that this is sort of like the birthplace of the Oakland Berkeley Hills. All that ridge line bubbled out of the earth here. That's the locus for the landscape that people love so much today.
And the labyrinth you were talking about, what does that look like? I mean, can you describe that a little bit?
Yeah, it's this big stone hippie labyrinth on the valley floor. I believe it was built in the early 1990s by an enthusiastic Oakland denizen who visits the park a lot and just left as a gift to park visitors. I mean, it looks really cool with the aerial view when you're approaching on a trail, and then you just follow it through. It's not like hedgerows or something like that where you can't actually see the end. It's really fun, I think, for little children to follow it through. I've got two small ones myself, and we haven't been there together, and it's on the list of things to do on a future visit.
It almost sounds like it's almost kind of a spiritual thing.
Oh, it's a totally spiritual thing, and in that regard, it's very much a kind of a totem of a sort of a hippy-dippy sensibility that some people make fun of, but I actually really adore.
Another of your insider tips to the East Bay is the Oakland Museum of California. Tell us about that.
This is this really cool structure on the southern tip of Lake Merritt. Dates to the 60s. It's this like concrete brutalist structure, and it has really amazing landscape design, these kind of terraced plateaus. And inside it has this really cool interdisciplinary mixture of art history and science and history, all kind of having to do with the state of California.
So what are some of the things that we would see if we were to go to visit the Oakland Museum of California?
Well, I do know that there's the Charles and Ray Eames exhibition at the museum right now, and I think that's emblematic of their programming sensibility. I mean, I know that they have a lot of great 20th century art, including California art like Dievenkorn, as well as exhibits that pull from the natural sciences. And it sort of all adds up to what makes California, California.
Say we spent the morning in the museum and we worked up an appetite. Where might you send me for brunch?
So many choices. I would go for brunch to the classic Oakland brunch spot, Mama's Royal. It's right near the classic Auto Row in Oakland, and just a friendly place to get an Eggs Benedict or huevos rancheros, or just kind of wholesome California brunchy goodness. And for me, it was always the place to go get a cup of coffee with friends when I was younger, and now I go visit with all of my East Bay friends and their families, and you just kind of spread out and spend as much time as you need there and go do your next thing. It's a very, very welcoming, friendly place.
Sounds like it's a place where locals hang out.
Yeah, and I believe it's under new ownership now, but from what I've read, not a thing has changed. The whole point is to keep Mama's.
All right, okay, it's time to walk off some of those calories that we just consumed at Mama's. Where do we go to next?
Well, not too far away from there is the Temescal Alleys, which are kind of the main destination of the Temescal neighborhood in Oakland. It's really, really been up and coming over the last decade or so. And the alleys are, it's this little maze of converted carriage houses that house all these independent businesses. There's like an apothecary and a barbershop and a horticulture place and a vintage store. I'd be remiss also if I didn't mention this leather goods store called Claflin Thayer & Co. that's run by an old friend of mine named Liz Thayer, who makes great leather jackets. And the whole place has this really, really strong feeling of community. It's like business owners hanging out together and doing their thing together. And that kind of like creative, artisanal maker culture that's become really prominent in Oakland over the last few years. The larger neighborhood around it is really great. There's great food. That's where Burma Superstar is, which has gotten a lot of attention over the last few years. And there's a great Mexican restaurant called Doña Tomas and a number of other good spots. It's a great, you don't want to visit Oakland and miss Temescal. Okay,
so where do we go next as we walk around after the alleys?
When I was younger, I just loved walking around the Berkeley Hills in the same way that I love going to, a new city today, whether it's like Athens or Buenos Aires, and walking around a residential neighborhood and seeing the fancy houses. And you can walk around the Berkeley Hills and inhaling the smell of the bougainvilleas and checking out some of the Mabec houses. There's one called the Temple of the Wings, which was built in a Greek revival style for this dance troupe, who lived, I think, partly outdoors and were one of the reasons that the hill was known as Nut Hill once upon a time for all the Berkeley eccentrics who lived up there.
Wow, that sounds really cool. Are there any noteworthy hotels in the East Bay?
There most certainly are. The most noteworthy, and you can't miss it if you're in the East Bay, is the Claremont, which recently got a total makeover. So this is a century-old Grand Dame, and you'll notice it from the bridge, from the city. It's this big, white, castle-like structure. One of my defining memories of it was it standing proud and strong during the 1991 Oakland Hills fire while the hills behind it burned, and we should all be grateful that it was saved. It's now just gotten a complete overhaul. There's a new restaurant, new tennis courts, a new spa, and it's just a really, you can go there without a room and eat in the restaurant or swim in the pool, and I encourage everybody to visit it because I feel like it's just a really nice way to get the feeling of what luxury meant in California in the early 20th century. It still feels that way.
And, when we talk about the East Bay, we really can't stay away from the food scene too long. So do you have any other favorites that may be, kind of flying below the radar that we should know about?
Well, sure. I mean, everybody knows Chez Panisse, and everybody should go there. I mean, it is one of the defining restaurants of our time. It is the birthplace of California cuisine. But I find that a lot of people don't know about the other restaurants in what's called the Gourmet Ghetto along Shattuck Avenue there in Berkeley near Chez Panisse. There's a place called the Cheese Board that really did artisanal pizza before that was a thing. I'm a huge fan, and if you just feel snacky or you want to go somewhere like, say, the Berkeley Rose Garden for a picnic, you could pick something up at the Cheese Board and go there. There's a great Jewish deli called Saul's. Oh, my goodness. Just thinking about Saul's is making me hungry. I mean, these are all just like the flavors and the smells of my childhood, and I adore them.
Wow, that sounds amazing. Any other insider information before we go?
Well, sure. I'd be happy to share. There's this place that I'd never heard of while growing up called Port Costa, and I've been going there occasionally when I go home. A lot of my East Bay friends are into it as a kind of insider secret. It's to the north, like where the bay curves around into the Carquinez Strait and then turns into the Delta, which is also an interesting place to explore in its own right. And it's this like little biker town that you approach on a dead end, and you hit the waterfront, and then you'll see all these motorcycles, and you'll see all these like kind of raggedy looking Victorians, and you know you're there. And there's great food. There's this restaurant and cafe called The Warehouse, like just fun, quirky little shops. There's hiking nearby if you want to do that. It's still the East Bay still does have these like kind of secret hidden pockets, and that's one of them. Just don't tell anybody else. This is an insider's guide.
That's right, exactly. So, we got to give it away a little bit, but not to everybody, just a select few. Talk to me about the Chapel of the Chimes. What's so noteworthy about that place?
Oh, the Chapel of the Chimes is a columbarium in Piedmont, right near Berkeley and Oakland. And it was designed by Julia Morgan, who is one of the most significant female architects in history, probably most famous for designing Hearst Castle. And it's just it's an incredibly tranquil place. It's this sort of, labyrinth of funerary urns that almost have this feeling like library stacks. That's what I always think when I'm there. And occasionally you stumble on some like really beautiful stonework or a mosaic or a little fountain. And there's just beautiful filtered light. And it's just one of the truly sacred places for the dead that I've ever been to. Behind it is the Mountain View Cemetery, and that was designed by Frederick Law Olmsted, who I think a lot of people know designed Central Park. He also designed parts of the Cal campus, and that's a really nice place to wander as well, and great views.
And great views. I mean, it sounds like it's not the kind of place that a tourist would necessarily go, but it might be a really nice place to visit for a quiet, contemplative, kind of chill out space.
Yeah, 100%. Once you've gotten your fill of the dining scene and the loud public places and you just need a moment to yourself, that's a perfect place to go.
All right. Thanks so much, Jesse.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for talking to me.
Absolutely. Jesse Ashlock is executive editor of Travel and Leisure magazine. Thanks so much for giving us the inside scoop on the East Bay. Thank you for listening to California Now. This podcast is produced by Visit California. I'm your host, Satirius Johnson. You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, and Spotify. Please subscribe. Today's episode took us out to the desert and up to the Redwood Coast. We explored some hidden nooks and crannies in the East Bay, and we looked at beautiful buildings in San Diego, Orange County, Los Angeles, Silicon Valley, and more. As you may have figured out, the best way to see all of the amazing sights in the Golden State is via road trip. Fortunately, we've put together a 36-page magazine highlighting a dozen of the best road trips in California. You can order your free copy by visiting us at visitcalifornia.com.